Open any live flight tracker. Watch it for just a few seconds, and something strange begins to appear. Europe, crowded. North America, crowded. Asia, almost impossible to follow. Thousands of aircraft, moving in every direction. But then, your eyes drift south, and suddenly, everything disappears. Antarctica, a continent 1.5 times the size of the United States. And on most days, you could count the planes crossing its skies on one hand. Why? It isn't banned airspace. It isn't a war zone. It isn't some forgotten corner of the map nobody wants to fly to. Airlines fly to Antarctica's edges. Tourists fly over it in sightseeing aircraft. Research stations depend on airplanes to survive. So this isn't a story about a place with no reason to fly. It's a story about a place where flying has to be earned. And the answer isn't what you'd expect. In fact, the first 3 answers you'll think of are all wrong. Or at least, not the whole truth. Let's find out why. The obvious guess is temperature. Antarctica is the coldest place on the planet. Minus 70 degrees Celsius isn't unusual in winter. Surely that's it. Surely engines just can't handle that, except they already do. Right now, dozens of flights cross the Arctic Circle every single day. Cruising altitude up there is often colder than the surface of Antarctica. Modern jet engines are built and certified for exactly this. Cold isn't the villain of this story, so scratch that theory. Let's try another. Maybe it's simpler than temperature. Maybe airlines just avoid flying over places with nothing below them. No cities, no people. But wait, airplanes cross the Pacific Ocean constantly. Thousands of miles of open water. No runway in sight. For hours at a time. If empty below were the disqualifier, half the world's long-haul routes wouldn't exist. So it's not that nothing is down there. It's what happens if something goes wrong. And that's where the real story begins. Every commercial flight path in the world is built around a quiet, unglamorous question. If an engine fails right now, where would we land? Over the Pacific? Over Siberia? Over the Sahara? There's always an answer. A diversion airport, reachable within a set number of flying hours. It's a rule airlines live by. Over Antarctica, there almost isn't one. A handful of ice runways exist, built for research stations, not for commercial emergencies. Some can only be used in daylight, some close entirely for months at a time. So if something goes wrong, over the middle of that continent, there may be nowhere to put the plane down at all. But that's only the first problem. Let's say, somehow, the aircraft lands safely on the ice. What then? The nearest help might be over 1,000 miles away. No highway, no hospital, no warm building nearby. Search and rescue teams. That would reach you within hours almost anywhere else. Could take days here, if the weather even allows them to fly. In most parts of the world, an emergency landing is the end of the danger. In Antarctica, it can be the beginning of a much bigger one. Here's something pilots learn very quickly about Antarctica. The weather doesn't play by the usual rules. Antarctica creates its own wind system. Powerful rivers of freezing air flow down from the polar plateau, sometimes reaching hurricane force, with very little warning. A clear sky can become a complete whiteout in just a few minutes. And out here, weather forecasting is far more difficult. There are fewer weather stations, fewer observations, less infrastructure than almost anywhere else on Earth. You're not just flying over unfamiliar ground, you're flying through weather. That can change faster than anyone expects. There's another challenge too, one most passengers never think about. Near the poles, magnetic compasses become unreliable. The Earth's magnetic field doesn't behave the same way here. Modern aircraft rely on satellite navigation, inertial navigation systems, and advanced flight computers. But even those systems require additional procedures in polar regions. Communication can become more difficult. Satellite coverage is less consistent. Radio communication can be less reliable. Nothing suddenly stops working. But everything becomes just a little less certain. And in aviation, less certain is something airlines work very hard to avoid. Now we arrive at the question that airlines quietly ask before every flight. Is the risk worth the reward? Every route begins with a calculation. Not just fuel, not just distance, not just time. Risk. How many things could go wrong? How difficult would they be to manage? And what would happen if they did? Flying over Antarctica quietly increases every one of those calculations. Fewer diversion airports, longer rescue times, more unpredictable weather, more demanding navigation, smaller safety margins. None of those reasons alone would stop a modern airliner. But together, they tell a very different story. A route with more risk and very little to gain. So airlines make a simple decision. If a safer route already exists, take the safer route. That's why this was never really about one single reason. It was never just the cold, or the weather, or the missing airports, or navigation, or rescue. It's all of them, working together. Hundreds of engineers, pilots, dispatchers, meteorologists, and regulators, all quietly reaching the same conclusion. There is a better way, and that's the route they'll choose. Narration only, Part 6, Ending. And maybe that's the real story. Not a continent that keeps airplanes away, but an industry that has spent more than a century learning exactly where the limits of safety begin. Every empty stretch of sky you saw at the beginning of this story isn't a place aviation failed to reach. It's a decision, a deliberate one. Commercial aviation didn't become one of the safest ways to travel by taking unnecessary risks. It became this safe by refusing to. Every route, every procedure, every backup plan exists because someone, somewhere, learned a lesson the hard way. Most passengers will never think about those decisions. They'll board their flight, watch a movie, take a nap, look out the window, and arrive safely without ever realizing how many invisible choices protected them along the way. So the next time you open a live flight tracker, don't just look at where the airplanes are, look at where they aren't. Because sometimes, the most interesting place on the map is the empty one. Antarctica isn't empty because airplanes can't fly there. It's empty because when airlines weigh every possible risk, there is almost always a safer choice. The quietest sky on Earth isn't quiet by accident. It's quiet because millions of people safely reach home every day, thanks to decisions they never even knew were made.